Hello and welcome to Necropolis. This is actually Necropolis Brutal Edition. So, back a few months ago, Hairbrained Schemes, a lovely company, released Necropolis to, we'll say, mixed results. And that was unfortunate, that the reception was so mixed, because Hairbrained Schemes is a lovely company that can make great things, like, say, Shadowrun. And the upcoming BattleTech game, which looks awesome. But they had a bit of a misstep with Necropolis. It was released with a lot of similar sounding reviews. People saying, we really want to like it, but we can't, and here's why. And a lot of the complaints were things like, the mechanics are too obfuscated, not enough early game variety, a little clunky, etc., etc., and Hairbrained Schemes, being who they are, they have a history of listening to the community and having a lot of fixes and post-release support for their games. This is something they've done with pretty much all of their games, going all the way back to their first release of Shadowrun, even going back to, what was it called, Dragonfall? Shadowrun Dragonfall, which was sort of a director's cut-ish edition full of improvements and things that they did for that game. And now along comes Necropolis Brutal Edition, which is a 1.1 release update to Necropolis. And it adds a bunch of things and changes a bunch of things, and in my opinion, it has made the game a lot better. And this opinion seems to be shared by a lot of other people, so I'm going to show you a couple of things. So, one of the first big changes you'll notice is there's a new class. So, the Blackguard was the standard class that everyone has seen now for the game. However, there's now the Brute, which plays quite a bit differently. He's, well, he's a pretty big dude, and for this video we're just going to play the Lady Brute, because why not? And, you still have all kinds of different dies you can find and unlock, and I really like the Hold of Polybius die, so we're going to select that one. Now, the Brute has some pretty heavy, slow, wide swings for all the weapons. You will find that all of the weapons that you can get will have different animations for the Brute than they did with the Blackguard, and that he even starts with, or she in this case, a bit more health than the Blackguard. You'll also find that you can just walk into destructible items instead of attacking or dodging into them in order to break them, which is kind of nice. So, for those of you who don't know what Necropolis is, this is where you begin, the very entrance to the Necropolis. It is a randomly generated sort of rogue-lite third-person dungeon crawler. And if I actually go back here for you, just to show you really quick, the control scheme, and in fact, sort of general way that the game feels, will be immediately familiar to you if you've ever played a Souls game. Especially, I would say the combat feels a bit similar to DS2, actually, or Dark Souls 3. And just the game feels quite similar to that. It's definitely not as smooth, the animation quality isn't as good, and of course the game is very stylized looking, but Hairbrained Schemes is an indie company, so that is to be, it's forgivable. And the game takes place in a very large, randomly generated dungeon called the Necropolis. So, another one of the big changes you'll notice, you have a lot of changed descriptions for your items. So, the Scriptorium, for those of you that don't know, allow you to access the codexes, not codices, codexes, and these are sort of permanent unlocks. A lot of roguelites do this. They give you meta progression. They allow you to, because of course this game does have permadeath, you die once and you start over. So, you will, by getting gems, the currency that you can spend in a given run, and also by completing various objectives that the big brazen head, the Illuminati-looking fellow behind me there, will give you, you get tokens of favor which you can spend. I have 8 of them right now, to unlock these, and also to unlock different dies for your characters. And these are sort of permanent upgrades that you can choose and equip one of at any given time. And one of the biggest complaints for a lot of people was that these didn't have very good descriptions. And it felt weird unlocking them because you're expected to spend your hard-earned tokens to like permanently upgrade yourself in ways that you don't understand. So a lot of these have had their descriptions altered in ways that make it a lot more clear what they actually do. So now it's much less guesswork is involved in actually figuring out what each of these codexes do. In this case, I like this one. This one's pretty nice. Makes it obvious what it does. You won't get knocked down. You have immunity to knockdown. But I've been rolling with this one for a while. In this case, as soon as I equip it, if you watch my health gauge, you'll notice immediate effect reduces your health a bit, but you hit harder. You do more damage. And also it increases your aggro, I believe. It makes enemies see you from a little farther away. I've just been trying it out. I'm saving up some more tokens for now. And the crafting system has been changed a bit as well. So now everyone starts with just 3 standard crafting recipes: rotten food, standard ration, and adventurer's chalk, and 1 potion of some, of some kind that changes every run. It can be just 1 sort of low-tier potion. And in order to unlock more of the crafting recipes, you will find some recipes lying around the actual dungeon that you can just pick up, and that will add them for that particular run. Or you can buy a codex that will give you, and equip the codex obviously, that will give you a selection of recipes depending on the codex you buy. One related to a bunch of traps and throwable items, one related to a bunch of food, one related to a bunch of potions, you know, things like that. So, those are some of the bigger changes and improvements that have been made so far. Another thing that's changed is the overall combat system and animation quality has been altered a bit for the better. Combat has, I wouldn't say been sped up necessarily, but the animations have been polished to feel better. It feels like there's less sort of backswinging and less downtime, oh god, between your attacks. And that makes combat in general feel a lot more responsive. Also, the brute fat rolls instead of the blackguard's kind of fancy, almost ethereal little dash that they do, you fat roll, so you have to deal with that. But yeah, the combat system feels just a little more polished now than it did before. And that helps because, of course, combat is really the meat of the game, and that was one of the other major complaints, was that one of the things you spend the most of your time doing was unpolished and almost unfinished feeling for a lot of people. And that is a complaint that has been addressed in a pretty good way and continuously is being improved. Even the latest hotfix, 1.1.1 I think it's called, because, you know, version numbers get silly sometimes, actually improved the animation quality even further, just a little bit, in a couple of different weapon animations, just polished them up a bit, helped them get a bit better, and overall has just enhanced the feel of the game a little bit, making it a more premium feeling experience, making it less slow and sluggish feeling. And again, if we were to look at some of the more major, immediately noticeable improvements, variety in enemies, tile sets, levels, things like that, has been greatly improved from the beginning. They have added 1 large new tile set, the Black Forest tile set they're calling it, which is an outdoor snowy forest biome. It's beautiful, but you might not see it for a while because it's quite far in, I believe. And can be difficult to reach, but it is there. And they've also made changes to a lot of the other tile sets to make them appear, I'm not, more often, I don't think is the correct word, to make them appear more regularly and more expansively. So for instance, there's always a nice big great swamp on level 3, and it's a really nice looking outdoor swamp with a good variety of enemies of a specific type that you'll pretty much only see there. And I found the chest chicken! The chest turkey? The treasure turkey? Chest chicken? The bird in the box. And he sells you recipes, or potions, and things. Let's get a potion of vigor. Thank you, chest chicken. Treasure turkey. Sure. The vessel poultry. So, now that all of those enhancements have been made... unknown potion. Lovely. I bet it's delicious. You'll probably find the overall sort of experience of actually exploring to be less tedious right off the bat. You'll find that even in earlier levels, the variety of enemies and areas has been enhanced greatly, and thus, of course, the variety of equipment that you can find, because enemies drop what they're wearing and wielding as equipment. So, of course, if you're encountering more new kinds of enemies, you're also encountering more new kinds of equipment than before. They've added a great deal of new weapons, armor, scrolls, potions, and things like that as well in the 1.1 version that help to enhance the experience, and it's overall really rounded out the game's variety. Really, Necropolis on release, I wouldn't have called a bad game. Not at all. I would have said that it just felt unfinished. It seemed like it needed a couple more months in the oven, and like it could have maybe used some classes and a bit of extra polish on top of what was already there. And that's exactly what they've given it, and it's really paid off. It's shown that they had a really good foundation, and that the game itself was not bad, but had flaws, cracks in its surface that otherwise were, you know, well-established mechanics and things like that that were just imperfectly applied. Which is good to see, because I never want a game to fail, especially a game that I was quite interested in by a developer that I very much like. And in this case, it's good to see, I guess, the potential of a game being realized. So, if you've played Necropolis before and found it lacking, maybe give it another shot. The variety has been enhanced, like, twofold in the early game. It really gets going around the third floor because of the much larger variety of enemies and biomes that you'll be finding by then, and it just continues skyward from there with a pretty significant variety of places and enemies. And of course equipment from that. By the way, the shield bash sort of parry of the Blackguard is replaced with this big shield slam with a shockwave that the Brute uses. And I'm about to die, by the way. I should use this here potion. So if I just were to talk about some of the more basic, just ground level mechanics of the game, in Necropolis, you will be venturing through a very rogue-like-ish dungeon with lots of unidentified potions and scrolls that you can drink or read at your leisure, if you will. Or wait until you find like a scroll of Identify to use if you want. They could be good, they could be bad, they could kill you, which is very likely. And the combat system is very reminiscent of a less polished but still quite enjoyable Dark Souls. You have a light attack. Ah, crap. These guys are always good to kill. Yeah, before they disappear. Gotcha. You have a light attack, like so. A heavy attack. And, of course, a stamina system, which you can very clearly see. And you also have these, which are power attacks. If you hold the light or heavy attack button, you build up to a power attack. If you release the attack button, which I'm not doing right now because I don't want to utilize it, you will unleash a power attack, which is a big, very strong, and usually shockwave creating attack that is very potent and very good for dealing with large groups of enemies, but will permanently, well, semi-permanently, take away some of your maximum stamina. As you can see, my stamina bar has that little gray notch at the beginning of it that shows that it can't regenerate that little portion anymore because I'm starting to get tired. Because you need to eat in this game. Again, very roguelike-esque. And that will slowly build up as you just move through the dungeon and don't eat and fight and stuff like that. But it builds up a lot faster, and in fact I'll just do it to show you. If you use a power attack, it immediately creates a large, like that, a big portion of it. There we go. so you need to eat. But finding food isn't always easy. You can, of course, craft it, but you have to make sure you're killing enemies that can actually drop the materials as well. And you are looking to... This room is very dark. You're looking to make your way through the Necropolis, and at the end, you will reach what is, hopefully for you, a nice room with an elevator that will lead you down to the second floor, which will have a different biome. Now, the levels are randomly generated, but they also have a theme to them, so they aren't completely random. Like I said, Stage 3, for instance, always has that big swamp in it somewhere. It's not always in the same place, it's not always the same shape or size, but it's always there. And this area is... I've never seen a first floor with this many Grine, which are these red crystal enemies. I usually don't see anywhere near this many on the first floor. I'm probably going to die in this room, actually, because this is a load of them. There we go. And that's what the power attack is good for. But yeah, and as I mentioned, the Brute and the Blackguard have completely different movesets for the same weapons. So there are long swords, axes, hammers, short swords, wands, staves, all kinds of things. And you will also be given, as you can see at the very bottom there, 3 different things to do by the Brazen Head, who I love. He's quite funny. And if you complete any of those things, you will get a token of favor for each one, which you can, as I mentioned, use to sort of semi-permanently upgrade your character between runs. When you move down to a new floor, any currently completed tasks will be regenerated, basically, with a new task. So that's another reason to move down a floor, instead of, like, farming a floor. And there is no experience or level up system in the game. Progression is done solely through killing stronger enemies to get better equipment, and getting these tokens of favor to unlock new codexes, and finding better loot in chests, and also by killing those triangle enemies, those pyramidal enemies, triangle enemies, what? That sometimes drop really good stuff. And I also found a secret wall that had this poison sword in it, which is pretty great. So, also you do have a dodge. Very important. And those codexes that you can unlock are pretty important because they do tend to change up exactly how you would be playing. Like in this case, obviously, with the codex I'm using, I'm a bit squishier. Obviously, using the Brute, it's not as bad because he starts with more health, so losing some of that health isn't as bad as if I started with even less health and have to lose that. And I do more damage with my swings, but enemies notice me from farther away, so that puts you into a certain kind of high aggro playstyle, basically. And also, depending on what kind of things you want to pick up, because as I mentioned, enemies drop their equipment. So if a particular enemy is using a particular sword, then if you are able to kill that enemy, he will drop it. That, of course, means that if you want a particularly strong weapon, then you may have to kill a particularly strong enemy in order to get it, which is just the nature of the game. And there are various enemy types that can do certain things. For instance, there are some really cool enemies I've found that, I believe they're called the Shadowborn. They're these kind of almost Ratmen-like lurker enemies, and I found this one that had a sort of wrist-mounted fire arrow launcher crossbow thingy. I think it was called a Shadowborn Flamecaster, and it actually took your shield slot. So that's another complaint they addressed, that you're only able to do sword and board. They've put a lot more weapons into the game than just swords, and also there are various items and weapons that replace the shield. You can get like tower shields and stuff, and you can also get wands and other things like this thing that I'm talking about, which was a sort of wrist-mounted firebolt launcher or crossbow-like thingy, which was pretty cool. And you can use it as a pretty strong... pretty strong... oh god, ranged attack. But of course it also took a good amount of stamina to use rapidly. And you had to aim it carefully, which meant that you could be moving quite slowly, which meant that you could be being sneaked up on and murdered. And I, of course, did mention the permadeath aspect of the game. One run is indeed one run. After that, you are dead. And your total number of gems that you've collected is totaled up after you are killed, and that amount will result in a gain of tokens of favor, as well as the tokens that you may or may not have gained from completing any of your given tasks. Oh, jeez. There are a lot of dyes in the game, by the way, a lot of colors to unlock for your characters. You'll see once I die, actually, if I play for that long, there are a lot of them. And there's the final door. You can tell because, unlike the other doors on the level, its mouth is open, because it needs 200 gems to open. All of the final doors, the elevators, will have an open mouth like that, and require 200 gems. Also, it's good, just as a little strategy, a little player tip for new players to the game, try and reach the final door on the first floor with 700 gems, because in every final room, there is a sort of fountain where you can get this thing called the Blessing of the Gods, and it will completely refill your health, as well as boost your maximum health and refill your stamina, so you don't have to eat. That ensures that you will go to the next floor with maximum health and stamina and an increased maximum health. So that's nice. And on the first floor it costs 500 gems. So that's 200 gems for the door and 500 for the blessing. And that is something I would highly recommend that you do on the first floor at least. The cost of the blessing goes up a lot every floor by about 1,000 each floor. Also, this guy appears at the beginning of the Necropolis and somewhere in the final room on every floor. Old Man's Necropolis Essentials. I'm gonna buy a Scroll of Identify because I have the extra to spare and use it, and it will identify everything you're currently holding. Now I can see I've got a haste potion here, and a Scroll of Healing, which is really nice, but does heal enemies as well. And a Scroll of Command, which is really nice. Alright, sweet. One thing I haven't mentioned yet is this game does have co-op, and it works very, very well. The game can get very chaotic, though, because you can hurt your friend. So be careful about that. Don't run into the group and swing wildly. You can hurt your teammate. Although, the enemies can hurt each other as well, and that's not just in co-op mode. Even in single-player, enemies can hurt each other. The co-op also does work in a sort of drop-in, drop-out mode. You can just appear in one of your friend's games and then leave if you want to. You can also, of course, if you don't want that to happen, just stop it from happening by setting it to invite only or whatever you want. So that's nice. And, of course, I'm not showing that off in this video, but I do plan on having some co-op footage a bit later with a friend of mine that I'm going to put up because Hairbrained Schemes was nice enough to give me 2 codes for the game, so shout out to them for that, because that does allow me to actually show you the co-op functionality, because it is a lot more fun to venture into the deep darkness with a friend by your side to horribly murder you by stabbing you in the back. So I will be showing that off in the near future. Also, the art style of the game is really nice. It's got this really, really cool, highly stylized sort of flat shading, and a nice sense of humor. And one of the final complaints about the game was that a lot of the weapon and item descriptions, aside from the codexes, were also quite vague and didn't tell you whether or not they were better than other weapons and things like that. Stats were not introduced, like, you know, this weapon does this damage, or this armor has this defense, and things like that. But much more clear descriptions were given to weapons. Like, for instance, this one just says it curses enemies. It's like a poison blade, basically. It slows them and things. And things like that. And there are different armors and shields and all kinds of things you can get, and their various descriptions are now much clearer about different special properties and various boons and banes that they may apply to you or your enemies, so that it's a lot more clear whether or not you should be equipping it and if you do so, what advantages or disadvantages it may give you, which is of course very important in an RPG because you want to know a lot more clearly what you should be doing with your character. So this is Necropolis Brutal Edition, a marked improvement on the game. Something that they've done a really good job in actually taking the criticisms to heart and fixing the larger scale problems with just how the game was sort of treated, because it was a very good base for a game with some fairly serious flaws in terms of how it was designed versus how people were playing it, because that much obfuscation in its mechanics and things just really didn't help it very much. So they really helped to clear a lot of stuff up and add a lot more variety and things like that to all of the loot and enemies and places to go, and also adding the Brute is pretty fun as well. So yeah, there we go. It is available right now on Steam. Pick it up for $30. I would say that the $30 price tag is a lot easier to recommend now with all these new additions, and a promise of even more to come, I believe, as well. Who knows what may come next for Necropolis? It's clear that they are still working on it and that they do indeed care very much about the game, and I think a content update this large and with this many community-suggested fixes shows that it's probably, if you were interested but unsure, it's now crossed from maybe I don't know to it's definitely a worthwhile investment. And I would say that the $30 is quite a bit easier to recommend now. So, I will link you in the description below this video to the Necropolis page on Steam. You may go and check it out or pick it up. And of course, do remember that the Necropolis can be explored and suffered through with your friends. Thank you very much for watching, guys. If you enjoyed the video, there is a like button below to show me that. If you did not like the video, holy crap, is that like a dragon? There is another button below to show me that. And, I'm gonna get eaten by a well worm. I'll see you guys next time.